Thanks, Amanda. So in the Old Testament, in this book of First Kings that Stephen read from, Amanda was just referencing, we have what's going on here in the background. Actually, I'm going to skip to a different story real quick. In the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, remember the kingdom is split between the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The story that we read from First King takes place in the northern kingdom. But I'm going to quick jump to a southern kingdom story. There was a king named Hezekiah. Hezekiah was king during a time when the Assyrians were growing in power and conquering more and more territories. And Hezekiah was afraid that the Assyrians were going to come in and were going to take over Judah, the southern kingdom, and their stronghold, their capital city of Jerusalem. So Hezekiah did something rather innovative, or maybe this was suggested to him, but regardless, what he ended up doing was he asked those who were stonemasons and excellent diggers to dig a massive tunnel under the city that was about a third of a mile long, and they were going to divert water from the river so that it would, A, not flow where the Assyrian army could access it for their troops, but it would instead be secretly funneled into this tunnel that would reach under the city walls. This tunnel is a tunnel that members of our church who went on the pilgrimage in 2022 spent part of an afternoon going through this tunnel. You can still walk through it. It's called Hezekiah's Tunnel. It was not built for those of us who are 6'2", but you can squeeze through it. There are points where after you walk several stories down from stairs, you enter into the tunnel and you have to take off your shoes. You have to roll up your pants because it's about shin deep in most places because this cold water still flows through this underground tunnel even today. And so you walk through. There are times that it scrapes you on both of your shoulders as you go through, and I had to duck the entire time. The only light was by people who had their cell phone flashlights on. And it meanders through this cold, wet, damp-walled tunnel with head injuries awaiting you around every turn, but you can do that. And it was quite a thing to do. I enjoyed it for about 10 minutes. It was not a 10-minute walk. When you're going like this and judging each barefoot step carefully, you have to walk cautiously and slowly. And it took us, I think, probably closer to an hour to get through in this tight, claustrophobic, damp tunnel that most of us had no familiarity with. But I'm pleased to say that all of us survived, all of us made it through, and one of the group even bought the t-shirt. I survived Hezekiah's tunnel. I borrowed this today from that person, regretting every single day that I've thought about it, that I do not own, and I survived Hezekiah's tunnel t-shirt as well. But I like it. The truth of the matter is that I just willed myself not to be claustrophobic in that moment, and I told myself that it was going to be over at any moment. The problem of going through a tunnel like that you've never been in before is sort of like the first time you drive down Sickard Hollow Road and you think, when will this ever end? And then you start to learn the landmarks, and then it goes faster every single time that you do it. But having never been in this tunnel, I felt that way walking through. Surely around this corner will be the end. Surely we're about to reach the finish line. At any moment, piercing, blinding light is going to come shining through because we will see the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel to welcome us home and finish this trek. But it went on and on and on. Last week we talked a little bit about that story of St. Ia and how she was feeling that sensation of being left alone on the beach, and that's what grief feels like. I want to suggest to you today that oftentimes when we are struggling and when we are suffering, it feels like being trapped inside of a tunnel. We know rationally that there will be an end point. We know that we will emerge out on the other side, but the trial in the middle of the tunnel, especially when we don't know how to navigate the various turns and twists, becomes very difficult for us. And I know that many of you, because you have told me as much, are struggling right now. We talked about grief last week. Some of you are in that place. Others of you are dealing with a medical diagnosis or a lack thereof that hasn't quite been pinpointed, and it feels like you are in that darker place. Others of you have talked about struggles in your marriage or in relationships, and that's a difficult thing that you are working through right now. Others of you I know have told me about challenging financial circumstances that you find yourself in, perhaps in an unfamiliar place. Others of you are looking for work or have been in that place recently. And then, of course, we know that half of the country is pretty devastated about the election, and the other half are probably elated. And all of us can say we knew and confirmed exactly what we thought was the case, which was we are split. And that's a painful place to be in too. So I think that all of us come into the room, if it's not our own circumstances, and certainly those adjacent to us are going through something heavy, difficult right now. And I think an apt analogy is to say it is like we are groping in the dark, trying to find our way through something that we don't know when the end will come. And what do we do about that? What is the faithful response? What is it that we, as people who want to live as people of faith, who want to pray boldly, what is the response that we have in situations like this? This passage from 1 Kings tells the story of, as you heard now a couple times, about the prophet Elijah. Elijah is performing the role of a prophet, which, again, they're not fortune tellers, they're not future predictors. The prophet's role is to speak truth to power. They are a messenger who has a word from God that God has placed on their heart, and they are supposed to go into a situation, a problematic situation, and to speak to those in power and say to them, listen, I need you to be God's mouthpiece, and I need you to turn from the ways that you are leading the people, and I need the people to turn from the ways that they are currently behaving and responding, and if they do that, it's going to get better. But it's hard now, and it may get harder. But these are consequences, oftentimes, for previous actions. Turns out that in this story, God calls the prophet Elijah. And he goes like many prophets and many other biblical figures do. They have to go into a time of seclusion and a time of preparation. It's a wilderness moment. It harkens back to the Israelites wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And in this case, just like Jesus going into the wilderness to face temptation before he began his adult ministry, this is Elijah's moment. He goes into a river valley, but the river is drying up because there is a severe drought. And he is miraculously kept alive by food that is brought to him, even to the point that it continues just fine until they get to this extreme moment where the drought has gotten so sustained and it is so bad that now the food is coming up in short supply too. And Elijah says, God, what do I do? And he says, go to this community and you're going to meet a widow there and she's going to care for you. You're going to ask her for food. So that's where the story begins. Elijah goes into this city. He meets this widow woman. Now, bear in mind, widows in biblical times had zero rights, zero safety net, and oftentimes zero resources. And so to be a widow at a time of a famine is about as bad as it's going to get. And she is a single mom, and she's caring for her son. And Elijah comes across this woman, and she is gathering sticks. She is picking up what she will use to make a fire, to heat some leaven, to prepare what she tells Elijah is her final meal. She's got enough for her son to eat their final meal. And after that, they will expire. They are not going to make it. This is the end of the road for them. Elijah says, excuse me, may I have some water? She says, yes, I will fetch you some. He then says, oh, and I'm hungry too. Could you bring me something to eat? And she says, I don't have much. It's not prepared. I will make some for you, but it was going to be my last meal with my son. He says, I need you to do it anyway. And she does, and he does, and then he responds by blessing her with this miraculous deed that God causes, where the bread doesn't run out, and the oil doesn't run out, and everything goes okay. Now, much like last week's lesson, I want to pay attention to the story in between the two miracles. Between the miracle of Elijah surviving during the drought and famine because there are wild animals that bring him food, and the story about the leaven that doesn't run out and the oil that is an infinite supply. In between there, I think, is actually the more pertinent story for us today. Because what we see in this story about Elijah and the widow is what two people do when they are in desperate and unknown circumstances, and how they manage to make it through the tunnel. And if nothing else sticks with you, I want you to remember this. God often does God's best work in the droughts and the famines of our lives. God often does God's best work in the droughts and the famines of our lives. Part of what we are called to do is exactly what the widow and Elijah do in this moment, which is to do the small things we've always done, to take the small faithful steps, to live as though we believe that God is not done telling this story, knowing that God is leading us through this crisis and moving us into the next thing. So for those of you who find yourself in one of those moments right now, I want to assure you that God is in this moment, working through this with you. It may be hard to see initially, but faith compels us to believe that God's work is not done yet. And we do the next small, faithful thing. We take the next little step forward. What did the widow do? She did what she was taught to do. She did the thing that all good people in the ancient Near East, but particularly those from the Jewish tradition, were taught to do, which is when you encounter a stranger among you in need, you respond to their needs the best that you can. The law of Moses goes back to the 19th chapter of Leviticus, in the 33rd verse, when the alien resides within your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as a citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself. Why? For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord, your God. This was so deeply ingrained in that widow woman that when Elijah asked her for a portion of the meager meal that she was going to have with her son for the last time the two of them would eat, she said, I'm going to share it with a stranger. That is a faithful response. Maybe it defies logic. It certainly defies any kind of selfishness. And shoot, the woman didn't have anything to give anyway. But it's akin to the other stories that we find in the Bible. Those who give all that they had, the widow who puts the last 2 coins into the coffer because she believes that this serves some sort of greater purpose, or that God is at work in something she can't fully understand. This is the response that the widow has when Elijah asks her for this gift. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't say, God commands it of me. She just says, yes, I will do it. And it leads to something profound. It is the next small, faithful step. And let's not be confused. Elijah is also acting in the same kind of way of thinking. If you think it was hard to be asked for that as the widow, imagine being in Elijah's shoes. Could you imagine asking a woman in that situation, yeah, I need you to break off some of that leaven for me too. You don't know me from Adam, but I'm going to need some of that bread. The audacity. Except he was asking as an act of faith. He had already been told by God that this is going to be okay, and this is the person that I want you to go to, and this is the thing I want you to ask her, and you're just going to need to trust me. The next small, faithful response is the thing that we are called to do. It will be the thing that reminds us that sometimes God's best works are in the midst of the famines and the droughts of life. It's a reminder that sometimes when we walk through those darkest tunnels of our lives, and we think that around the next corner there may be light, there may not be, but it means that we put that one foot in front of the next, trusting that this will be over soon enough. I want to encourage us to come together and to be close in ways that show support and love, as Elijah did with that widow, and as the ways that she did for him. I want us to be reminded of the gentleness that we need to approach one another with, especially when those around us are hurting or suffering. But I also want to remind you of the most important thing. That God is not done yet. And sometimes in the most difficult, the darkest, famine-ridden, and drought-plagued parts of our lives is the part where God shows up to do some of God's best work. And in the meantime, we place one foot in front of another. We do the next small act of faith. And together, we emerge from this difficult time together. Will you pray with me?